On this week's episode of the Players Experience podcast, we chat with Toronto Maple Leafs arena announcer Mike Ross. We chat with Mike about his career into sports and into the NHL, what it's like to cover the Maple Leafs compared to what was the Ottawa Senators, and the comparison between the two clubs and the feelings around being an Ottawa kid and covering the Maple Leafs. We talk about the predictions for this year's NHL playoffs and so much more. Before we bring Mike onto the show, we of course would like to give credits to our production team, Jay Solti Photography and Vicmore Productions, for their work on the show each and every week with the intros and the imagery and the videos that you see for each episode. We also want to give a shout out to 19 Marketing for the merch production for the show as well. Additional to that, guys, we have a discount code with the Hush Blankets, Jaywalk, and the Great North Apparel. So use the Players Experience as you check out to get some discounts with those great companies. And lastly, guys, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Go to YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and make sure to subscribe and hit that like button so that you don't miss out on any exciting content each and every week as we produce more episodes talking with your favorite sport athletes, sport announcers, and individuals in sport. Now, without further ado, let's get Mike onto the show and talk about his career and who he thinks is going to win the NHL playoffs this year and the Stanley Cup. All right, Mike, how's it going, man?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time in what has been a crazy and hectic NHL schedule. How have things been throughout this year?
It's been interesting because, between really busy periods, there have been some long sort of lulls for us on the home front where the team goes out west. And I mean, we just came off, I think we had about a 16-day break with the team either out west playing in Edmonton and Winnipeg and Calgary and Vancouver, and then having some time off and then heading to Montreal. So yeah, the breaks have been a lot longer than we're used to. But at the same time, we're just like fans, we're just thrilled that our guys are getting to play, and that even though we're not necessarily running a lot of consecutive home games at times, they're on the road, they're busy, and we get to watch them on TV. And the TV schedule has been fairly friendly as well for folks in the Eastern time zones. So not too many 10 o'clock Eastern starts, which has been kind of fun.
No, it's been great, especially when, those Eastern time zones, man, especially when they go into overtime. You're watching games until like 1 a.m. and it's like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would love, and it's still a dream of mine, to live in Newfoundland. I'd love to buy a nice little house by the ocean and live in Newfoundland part of the year. But the sports calendar really, I mean, for those folks, is not friendly. You've got for example, a 7 o'clock Eastern game starting at 8:30 Newfoundland time. So can you imagine if you're watching a Maple Leafs game, let's say they're playing in LA at 10 o'clock Eastern, that's 11:30 Eastern time. Never mind all the fans that I've heard from who live overseas in Europe, and they're watching games sometimes at 3 and 4 in the morning. So, yeah, it's been nice to be able to tune into some Maple Leaf games on a weeknight at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, even though they're playing out west.
No, for sure. And we're going to talk about the Leafs and the playoffs. Playoffs are around the corner, and it's a very exciting time. So we're going to talk about that. But before I start off every show, I like to start off with a segment I call Rapid Fire. So I'm going to shoot off 4 rapid fire questions at you and just spit out the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
I am.
All right. Favorite time of day?
Afternoons, because I get to nap.
Hey, who doesn't love an afternoon nap? Strangest thing in your fridge?
Olives, because right now there are 3 jars of olives in my fridge. I don't like olives. My wife loves them. I can't stand them. So yeah, that's definitely the strangest thing in my fridge.
All right. What is a TV show you're currently watching outside of obviously when you're calling games?
Big fan of the Chicago series on NBC
Yeah.
and the 911 series on Fox. We love the emergency drama shows. So
Hey,
those are the
you
two
and
big
me both,
ones.
man. And
Oh, and Blue Bloods. Can't forget Blue Bloods on Friday nights. I just love a good cop show,
yeah,
and my wife loves Donnie Wahlberg.
that's awesome. Fun
Hmm.
fact: I met Donnie Wahlberg a few years ago, or more than
Oh
a few
wow.
years ago, at like a Chum FM breakfast thing, and he was there, and it was really cool. And he was really down to earth. So like, it seems like he's a pretty humbling guy.
Well, I got somebody upstairs who will be very jealous to hear that.
What would be another sport you would like to cover?
Baseball. Baseball is, when it comes to sports, is my first true love. I mean, I played hockey a lot over my lifetime, but I didn't start playing organized hockey until I was about, I think, 13. Baseball, I played from a very young age. Played organized baseball from a young age, and I've coached it. I continue to coach it to this day. I've been an official. I've played it well into my creaky knees days. So yeah, and I spent a little bit of time broadcasting it and working in media relations in professional baseball. So yeah, if I were to make a switch in careers and they said you can go work in any other sport, baseball would be it.
I love it because I'm a baseball player myself, so I get where the passion and the love for baseball is for sure. Now, at what point did you say to yourself, I want to be an NHL announcer?
Um, I don't know if I ever actually said that to myself or thought that to myself. Just like broadcasting, I've always just sort of enjoyed it. I've always admired people who do the job, but I never really thought of it as a career path, right? Like I never thought that could be my job someday. Um, and so I sort of fell into broadcasting when I was in university. I went to school to be a teacher, and in my first year at Carleton University, found that they had a campus radio station, and just I'd always had a bit of an interest, if not a fascination, with radio, and so I thought, well, I'm here. It's a volunteer, position, so why not give it a try? And so I started working on a sports show that I, within a year, was hosting and producing, and suddenly started thinking, well, yeah, there are jobs out there. Is this something that I want to do? And before I knew it, I mean, within a couple of years, I was working in commercial radio, and the music radio station I was working at went all sports, and that was it. Once I got into that, and I was working on all sports radio, like I never looked back. It was sports broadcasting was my career. But for announcing, being a PA announcer, again, I fell into it in university. The university football team needed a PA announcer. They asked me if I wanted to do it since I did the sports show on the campus radio station. So I jumped in and did it. And the next thing I knew, the Ottawa 67's junior hockey team was looking for a PA announcer. I auditioned for that. Didn't get it the first time around, got it the second time around, and continued doing that until one day many years later I got an opportunity to do some NHL games in Ottawa. Did a few of those, really enjoyed it, and then just never really had those opportunities in Toronto. I moved to Toronto in 2001, and I there were no gigs, there were no jobs to be a P announcer. And so when the Maple Leafs gig opened up in 2016, I had done a little bit of work with MLSE and Hockey Canada at the World Juniors in 2014, 2015. And because they knew me through that gig, I got a call and offered an audition for the Maple Leafs gig. But up until that point, you hear the voice of Andy Frost at the Air Canada Center. Andy Frost isn't going anywhere, is he? Right? Like he was just, that's before him. It was Paul Morris. Those were just the voices that I grew up hearing as the voices of the Maple Leafs. So I never even gave it 1 second thought that I could potentially be in that position.
And we're going to talk about how you got to landed it, as you mentioned, you landed your job there, and we're going to talk about those experiences and a couple of the favorable moments, especially going from Ottawa to Toronto and being an Ottawa kid. But in 2001, you started work with Chum on a national sports radio show where you covered all sports from NHL, CFL, NBA, and MLB. Where did the path to NHL kind of continue on for you? Outside of picking those kind of careers? Sports.
So I started in sports radio in Ottawa in '98. We were the second sports radio station in Canada. The only other one was the Fan in Toronto. And in 2001, Chum, who owned the radio station in Ottawa, decided they wanted to launch a national network. And so I moved to Toronto at that time to be a producer and reporter for the Team Radio Network. Things didn't work out. After 15 months, it got shut down. And I ended up then going and working in television at Sportsnet for a few years, and didn't really intend on getting back into the radio game until I got an offer in 2005 to basically rejoin a lot of the people that I'd worked with in radio before, who were now part of launching XM satellite radio in Canada. And they were heading up the NHL radio channel on XM. They had a 10-year deal with the NHL. And so I was offered an opportunity to go in there as a producer, again, a reporter. And that was it. I mean, that was the start of a 10-year run for me with NHL radio. It started as a producer and reporter, eventually becoming a full-time host. I did the afternoon drive show there. I hosted the morning show there. And that was really 10 years of covering the NHL wall to wall. There were no other sports to cover. And I found it a little bit easier to do than all sports. I mean, with all sports, you got to be the jack of all trades and master of none. You got to have your thumb in so many different pies. And for us back then, boxing was still a big thing. So we had to cover boxing. We were covering world soccer. You're covering baseball, football, basketball, hockey. And it can be difficult. I have so much respect for the broadcasters out there who cover all of those sports at once and have a little bit or even a lot of knowledge on multiple sports. So I found it a little bit easier and a little bit more fulfilling to be able to sort of drill down on one sport. But at the same time, we were covering at the time 30 teams. 30 teams in the NHL to cover. We were not, I mean, we're based in Toronto, but we were not a Maple Leafs radio station. We were covering 30 different teams and offering coverage to fans right across North America. So it wasn't like it was a cakewalk, but that's when I sort of focused in on the National Hockey League versus being all sports.
And that makes sense too, because if you're going to pick, if you want to kind of, everyone wants to expand their knowledge, but if you want to really fine-tune the skills of your one sport, you want to pick that sport and do the best you can in that one area, right?
Well, it was necessity for me as well, right? I mean, I was offered an opportunity to switch things up and get back into broadcasting versus being behind the scenes. I really enjoyed my time at Sportsnet. I learned from some tremendous people. I moved up the ladder pretty quickly there. I was working on highlights when I first started, and then moved my way over to the assignment desk there, and was really part of helping plan daily shows, the daily sports shows, the daily highlight shows. And assigning our reporters to different events, and that was a lot of fun. And I got to go out to some events as well and cover some things, which was really a lot of fun. And being in television was something that was completely new to me at that time. But the opportunity to get back to radio, which was really my first love in communications, wasn't a very hard decision. And satellite radio was so brand new. I think they only had about 2 years, maybe 3 years of experience in the US. And to be part of another startup in radio was really exciting.
That's great. And like sports is such a love story too, right? There's so many great moments of sports that we like to cover. And I'm going to ask you in a short bit your favorite one that you've been able to cover. But first, let's jump to 2010, where you mentioned that you were a guest PA announcer for the Senators. You were arena announcer for the Ottawa 67s. And then in 2016, you became the public address announcer for the Leafs. Being from Ottawa and being an Ottawa kid and going to Carleton and living in that city, to then travel down the 401 to Toronto, what was it like to cover the Leafs compared to Ottawa in what is one of the big rivalries in the Canadian NHL landscape?
So the timeline for me, so 1998, I started with sports radio in Ottawa, and that's when I was announcing for the 67s. 1999, we won the Memorial Cup. So that my first season as a PA announcer in hockey, we won the Memorial Cup, which was just unbelievable. And the fact is that was the first and only championship I've ever been a part of until the World Juniors in 2014-15, where Canada wins a gold medal. And I was the announcer for that tournament. So, you're talking 15 years between announcing for a championship, which was something else. 2001, I moved to Toronto to start working for Chum. And immediately I'm covering the Maple Leafs. Like, I've gone from being on the Senators radio broadcasts and reporting from the Senators locker room to now being in Toronto and covering the Maple Leafs. So that took a little bit of getting used to, because certainly when you're working for for one team and let's face it, back then the Maple Leafs were thumping Ottawa in the playoffs. Like for years, it was Buffalo that was the playoff nemesis. Then it was Toronto. So suddenly being on the other end of it and watching the Maple Leafs go to the Final Four was like, wow, we're covering a team that is winning in the playoffs. That's kind of fun. That's exciting. And the other thing for me was I was now living in it. I really felt like I was finally living in a major league city, right? Being able to go to Raptor games, Blue Jays games, and knowing that I live in a city that has a Major League Baseball team, that was thrilling for me. I mean, I've been to so many baseball games, and even that first year working for Chum, we were the broadcaster for Blue Jays games, so we had tickets like galore. I was going down to maybe 1 or 2 ball games a week. It was insane. Like, it was so great. And we lived not too far from the stadium, so it was like, get on the subway, 20 minutes later, I'm at the stadium. I'm watching Major League Baseball live in the city now where I live. That was really cool. Plus, you've got the Leafs, and you just felt like you were in a big time city, which was pretty thrilling for me. But as far as PA announcing goes, leaving Ottawa in 2001, that was it. There were no PA jobs in the Toronto area. No junior hockey team looking for anybody. No minor league sports teams looking for anybody. So I just went about my life, went about my career, building my career in broadcasting. And 2010, the Olympics and Paralympics are happening in Vancouver. And Stu Schwartz, who was the PA announcer for the Senators, he went and did some announcing at the Olympics and at the Paralympics. Well, the Olympics was no big deal because the NHL had shut down for those couple of weeks. But when the Paralympics were running, the NHL was back, and the Senators needed someone to fill in for Stu for 3 games. And the game presentation manager at the time was a guy by the name of Glenn Gower. And Glenn had hired me at the 67s back in 98, 99. So he called me up and said, hey, listen, I need somebody to fill in for Stu and do 3 games. We've got the Capitals, the Flames, and the Maple Leafs coming to town. And I was wondering if you'd be interested in being the announcer for those games. So, I mean, of course, I jumped at the opportunity. Being a PA announcer, albeit in a fill-in role, but to announce NHL games in my hometown. And one of those games, by the way, is against the Maple Leafs. Like, wow, that was like, I was just floored. Jumped at the opportunity, did it, and kept doing it for them as a backup for another 6 years, and probably did anywhere from 2 or 3 games a year to I think maybe 5 or 6 games. I did some playoff games at times for them as well. So it was an opportunity to sort of stay in the game, stay in the announcing game, if you will, and have a really good time doing it. But never really thinking I'm going to be an NHL announcer, because I live in Toronto. I'm going up to Ottawa and filling in for Stu when he's away, when they need me. But it's not like it's a full-time gig. So it all changed for me when I did those World Junior Games in 2014-15. And for that, I mean, it simply comes down to the fact that I picked up the phone, I called Hockey Canada and said, I understand you guys always have a French announcer and an English announcer when the tournament is held in Canada. I'm bilingual, perfectly bilingual. I would love to get an audition for your PA announcing gig. Got the audition, got the job, end up working that tournament for Hockey Canada and MLSE. That then snowballed into a few more gigs. There were people at that tournament who heard me, who were involved in hiring for the Pan Am Games that were held in Toronto in 2015. Yep. Well, that is how I got an audition for the Pan Am Games and ended up doing men and women's baseball. There was someone there who had heard me and worked for TFC, the soccer team in Toronto. Well, they end up getting a call from Soccer Canada. Soccer Canada and the men's national team is hosting a couple of World Cup qualifying events. They need a bilingual announcer. TFC says, well, our guy's not bilingual, but the Leafs hired a guy to do the World Juniors. We'll see if he's available. So now that snowballs into that. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to pick up these freelance gigs here and there, and I'm starting to feel it. And again, it's not something that I'm thinking about as a permanent thing, because these are just freelance gigs. But there are a few more happening, which is kind of neat, gets me a little bit excited. And then in 2016, the Maple Leafs decide to make a change in game presentation. They bring in a new DJ, they bring in new hosts, a new anthem singer, and they decide to bring in a new PA announcer. And that's when I got a call from the Maple Leafs asking if I would be interested in auditioning for their PA announcing job. Never thought I would get it, but I'll certainly take a shot at it. And went through the process over about a month and a half, and I mean, pinch me to this day. I still am pretty shocked that that I was who they decided to go with. But it worked out. It worked out for me. But all that coming back to the fact that I never really thought I'd be doing this, certainly in the NHL on a regular basis for an NHL team.
That's incredible. I mean, sports is such a small knit community too that, like you said, it just snowballed. And when one person hears you, then the next person hears you, and the next guy, and here you are. And it's hard to believe it's been 5 years since 2016, and you've been rocking it. And I know I've been to a handful of Leaf games in that time span, and like, your work's great. Like, I get excited when I hear someone as enthusiastic as you in the rink and making kind of like those calls and getting excited when they make, like, when the Leafs score, like, obviously everyone wants to be excited and everything, but just to have that kind of extra, like, oomph to it is a bonus as well. So kudos to you, man, because you do a great job with it all.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's something that, it was it was difficult at first, because, I think as sports fans, we don't necessarily like change, right? We don't want our favorite player to retire. We don't want our favorite player to be traded or to decide not to re-sign with the team and go somewhere else. And I learned really quickly that people are passionate about their in-game experience. And I understand that. I mean, as someone who grew up listening to Paul Morris as the arena voice of the Maple Leafs, it was certainly a different time where I think the public address announcer back in the 60s, the 70s, even the 80s, I think was a little bit more present to the television audience, maybe less so now. So I think that when the Maple Leafs changed from Paul Morris to Andy Frost, I think that was jarring to a lot of people because Paul Morris had been such a huge part of their in-game experience, watching games at home on Hockey Night in Canada. And Andy, when Andy took over in '99, the internet was just starting. You didn't have social media, so it was a little bit more difficult for people to really opine publicly on that change and voice their opinions on that change. So 2016 rather, when I came into it, there were a lot of people who were skeptical of me and of the change, and it was not easy to read some of the comments that people were making, and unfortunately, sometimes even before hearing me do the job, they were very critical of me already, and it was like, you haven't even heard me do a game. Like, let me do a game or 10. But the great thing is, to me, all that said was that they were super passionate about the Maple Leafs, right? And they love their team. They love the experience the team gives them, and they don't want anybody messing with that experience. So I get it. I got it. I understood it, and I'm just thrilled that it's worked out for me, and hopefully for them, and hopefully what you just said, which I really appreciate, is the sort of the majority decision, because all I do is bring my passion to what I do, and I'm a fan just like you are, just like everybody in Leafs Nation is. I get upset at penalties called against us. I cheer goals. I get angry when we lose, love when we win. I'm as passionate as anybody else out there, and I hope that that's translated into how I do my job, and that the fans get a little something out of it.
100%. The way I look at it, honestly, Mike, is I live my life by a simple phrase: piss off one, please 1,000. You're not gonna please every single person, no matter how hard you could try. You could give them $100 and be like, just say you like me, here's $100, and they're like, no, you suck, right? So like, you're not gonna please everyone. So that's how I live my life. And it's like, when I work for a non-for-profit, there's sometimes people that question like my work, or like, how are you really truly making a difference? And it's like, I am. If you don't see it, like, sorry, I'm not really gonna plead like plead to you to try and see my case, right? And when I worked at Durham College, like you did with Carlton in the radio station, like I had a sport radio show, and it was the same kind of thing. Like a couple of the there was one of the producers of the show that were like, at first kind of questioned like my show, being like, is this really going to be something that gets picked up, right? And I was like, well, this is how I'm going to run it, and like we'll see how it goes. And sure enough, like it was favored by a lot of people, right? And then that one individual was like, yeah, like great job at the end, right? And again, it was like them trying to make up for not believing in what I was producing, right? And so that's the method I just live by. Because
Yeah, and I mean, to be clear, I would say that that's probably the ratio of reaction that I've encountered, right? So for one negative comment, there's been 1,000 people that are right there with me, and my favorite thing has been sort of converting some of the people who've been less satisfied. Like I had one lady one time, she sent me a tweet and or she named me, she added me in her tweet, and it was something like, oh, this new guy just sucks, and bring back Andy Frost, and so I sent her a message back, and I said, I'm really sorry you feel that way. I'm going to work really hard, extra hard in the second half of this season to try and win you over. And I got a response from her about 10 minutes later, and she said, don't worry about me. I'm just an old crank who doesn't like change. You're doing a fine job. And that to me was just great, because again, it just speaks to the passion people have for their team. And with the Leafs, it speaks to the passion they have about everything about the team, right?
yeah,
There are teams out there that you could change the public address announcer, and it'd be like, for most people, it'd be like, okay, whatever. We got a new guy announcing at the stadium, or there's a new woman announcing at the stadium. No big deal. But for the Leafs and for Leafs Nation, they are attached to everything about their team.
yeah,
And you see that in, thinking in the last few years where, long-standing employees with the team, some of the ushers that have been with the team for decades, who unfortunately passed away, and you see the reaction that people have, and in sharing in the grief of family members and friends and colleagues. It just speaks to how much this team means to not just this market, but to its fans everywhere. So that's why when you call it Leafs Nation, you could easily call it Leafs Global Nation, because I have been contacted by fans literally around the globe, and it's just amazing to me that I'm 5 years into this gig, and that they tapped me for it, right? Like the day I got that call is something I'll never ever forget, and I spend each day trying to really to do it justice, and to do the team proud, because I'm sure proud to be a part of it.
no, definitely. And you know what? I actually worked with MLSE back from 2009 to 2013 as gate staff. So when you were mentioning about how attached people are to the team and to the people around that team, I just want to give a shout out to the late great Andy Mastoris, who was one of the fantastic gate staff members there, and I got to work with him, and it was truly like humbling to see how many people will come up to him and really just chat with him and be like, hey, what do you think of that game? Or like, no, when's this guy going to get traded? And like just having talks with him, and he took the time to talk with every single person.
It's my favorite thing. My favorite thing about going to the rink these days is we have to go in at gate 1, and there's a door that has an inscription honoring him.
Right.
And that was his door, right? And so being able to go through that and see his name every time I go to the rink. It's just nice to sort of, wink or a little, tip of the cap. And it's just a great example of how the organization and their fans honor these longstanding members of the team, because that's what they are.
Exactly. Now, the playoffs are set to start in about a week or so, or in a few days. With the way that the divisions are set, how do you think Toronto is going to fare against the other Canadian teams, and then ultimately a team in the U.S., hopefully in the Cup finals?
Well, I mean, you look at the season that the Maple Leafs have had, and being in first place, and how they've handled their Canadian foes here. It's been remarkable to watch. It's been so much fun. I know that there are a lot of people who were questioning the whole divisional setup. I just think the NHL was facing a near impossible task in having to deal with teams on one side or on either side of a border, where even within one country, being Canada, the rules around putting on professional sports differed in every jurisdiction. So to manage to get everybody to the table and put together the protocols that they did and pull off the bubble the way they did last summer, and then go back and do it all again, this time with teams actually traveling from city to city and keeping it interesting, has been a lot of fun. Now, we also have to sort of recognize the performances that we've seen throughout the division this year, right? I mean, there have been some amazing players to watch night in and night out. What I'm very curious about seeing is the matchups you're going to get once you're in the Final Four. Yeah. Because you will not necessarily have the East, West, West. You could have a team from the East playing a team from the West, or this, sort of central, if you will, in the Final Four, rather than only in the Stanley Cup final. And when I was in NHL radio for many years, I was a proponent of a 1-16 playoff setup, where you could potentially have the New York Rangers playing the LA Kings in round one of the playoffs. Like, I would love to see that. Never mind the geography, just set it up 1-16. Now, geography is where, critics of that system or that playoff system, that was the first complaint they'd make. Well, you can't really have a team from the East Coast traveling all the way to the West Coast in the first round. It's going to kill the players. The travel is going to be terrible. And I just thought to myself, then make the playoffs work in a way that you accommodate for that. So if you have the Rangers playing the Kings in round one, then allow for 2 days between the geographical shift. So instead of one travel day, have two. Let them travel on the first day. Let them get acclimatized to the time change and being in the new city on that second day, and then play your games. Like, to me, there's so much good hockey being played that instead of having 3 games on in a night, where I, as a hockey fan, can only watch 2 if they're back to back, and I'm going to miss out on most of that third, spread it out a little bit. And I just think it opens up the door to so many new possibilities as far as matchups go, and maybe creating some new rivalries. But it never caught on, and it got poo-pooed by pretty much every hockey person I would talk to, or people inside the game, inside the NHL. So that's something I'm kind of looking forward to here, and wondering what those matchups are going to be once we get to the Final Four. I'm pretty excited about that.
Now, who is your prediction to win the Cup this year?
Whoever wins that final game, that 4th game in the Stanley Cup final, will be your Stanley Cup champion.
Love it. Now, you've covered a lot of games throughout your announcing career. Is there one game that stands out as your most favorable to announce at?
Wow. There have been a few. But I would have to say that it's pretty much a tie for me. My first opening night with the Maple Leafs, taking on the Boston Bruins, and it was a night where we had a ceremony where all the honored numbers from the history of the Maple Leafs, because the Leafs at that point only had 2 retired jerseys, and on that night they retired all of those honored numbers and retired Dave Keon's number. That was massive. That being my first home opener, that ceremony was almost 30 minutes, being 29 minutes and change. So that was 29 pressure-packed minutes of me talking, introducing all these players, their bios, etc. And that was my first home game, my first home opener. And so the pressure that I felt coming with that, like the nerves were unreal. I think to a degree I might have just been maybe too scared to be scared or too nervous to be nervous, right? But that was massive. It was such a huge historical moment in the history of the team. Never mind that it was my first one. So that was that was outstanding. And certainly, the outdoor game against the Red Wings, the Centennial Classic.
Yeah.
Just the whole energy, the whole vibe of that weekend, 40,000 plus fans, the entertainment that was part of that game. I mean, I remember getting home that night and saying to my wife, I introduced the Maple Leafs, I introduced the Red Wings, I introduced the commissioner of the league, I introduced Wayne Gretzky, and I introduced Bryan Adams. For a Canadian kid, I mean, how does it get any better than that? Like that's a career for some people who get into announcing. So, and the fact that we get the win, Austin scores the goal in OT, we get the win. Yeah, that one certainly stands out for me. So yeah, for now, I'll bookend it with that. My first opening night with that massive number retiring ceremony, and the outdoor classic and the Centennial Classic.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that whole Centennial Classic weekend was great. I was there for the alumni game, and it was freezing, but you know what? For a great reason, it was awesome to see, and they did a really good job with that.
And you almost got a true, honest, real fight in an alumni game between Chris Draper and Gary Roberts. Like, we all wondered, was that for reals? Did that just really happen? Were these guys serious? And then to hear them talk about it post game and say, yeah, the dislike is deep and it was definitely for real. We were like, wow. Fireworks on day one of the weekend. Yeah, so it boded well for the rest of the weekend to come with regards to outdoor hockey in Toronto between those two teams. That was a lot of fun.
Well, I'll tell you, if I ever get to interview either of them, that's the first question. So forget your career. Outdoor game, Toronto. How was that fight?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it was funny because, when they did their team photos and they sort of photobombed each other, and there just seemed to be, I don't know, camaraderie there, and it was you kind of felt like, yeah, it's a friendly thing. And then the game started, and it looked like they were taking it pretty seriously. And that the thing is with these games, when you've got guys that are so close to, so soon removed from the game, guys who haven't been out and retired for a long time, they still have, like, they'll have those competitive juices forever, right? Because they're professional athletes. That's what they do. They compete. But then you throw them into a situation like that where, yeah, you know what? Those competitive juices are flowing, and I'm so used to playing against that guy and not liking that guy and that team and that sweater that suddenly it sort of starts bubbling to the top, and you could kind of see, there wasn't, it wasn't hitting per se, but they were rubbing each other out in the corners, with a little bit more enthusiasm and prickliness than I think you're used to seeing in some of these games where it's like it's just shinny and there's no hitting. It's sending people off on long breakaways and things like that. So yeah, I mean that kicked off the weekend beautifully, and you're right. The mood of the whole thing, that whole weekend from start to finish, I don't think they could have asked for anything better. Except for giving the Red Wings 1 point. You didn't want to really do that in that game. Glad we won, but we didn't want to give away that point.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I like to end off every show with a segment called Words of Wisdom. So what would your words of wisdom or advice be for the next generation of sports broadcasters that want to get into sport, get behind the mic, and start making a career for themselves?
My advice is twofold. Number one, sometimes you have to make your own breaks. You can't just wait for a job to be posted. You can't just wait for something to come along. You got to network, and you got to make phone calls, and you got to make connections. And for me, I mean, what the Leafs gig for me all comes down to one phone call that I made in 2014 to Hockey Canada that got me the audition for the World Juniors. If I don't make that phone call to Hockey Canada, I don't get that gig. I don't work for MLSE. I get zero exposure to them. I don't get any exposure that led to the Pan Am Games, that led to the Soccer Canada gigs. This all the jobs that I got after getting that World Junior Championship gig don't happen if I don't pick up the phone and make that call. If I just sit around waiting for it to be posted, chances are it doesn't get posted. I don't see it, and I don't get that opportunity. So the fact that I'm sitting here now as the fourth PA announcer in Toronto Maple Leafs history, again, pinch me, is because I picked up the phone in 2014 and made that call to Hockey Canada. So I look at it and say, I managed to make some good connections along the way and got some great opportunities, but it starts with the fact that I made that first break happen for myself by picking up the phone and calling Hockey Canada. The other thing I will always say is don't say no to opportunities. I know that, volunteering doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody, but I go back to my early days when I was volunteering at that radio station at Carleton University, or volunteering doing TV play-by-play of Central Junior Hockey League games and AAA baseball games on Rogers Community 22 in Ottawa. And that's where I learned. That's where I got the foundation. That's where I really found that I had the passion to do what I do. And I didn't make a dime doing it. But I do say that I was paid handsomely in experience. So when I run into young people who say, oh, I'm not interested in doing this or that because I'm not going to get paid, you may not get money for that gig, but the experience is invaluable. And so I always say, if you get a chance to do something that you think you love and that you're going to gain experience from it, jump at it. Don't say no. Unless, you feel like you're really being taken advantage of, don't say no. Get that experience because it will be absolutely invaluable to you down the line.
Awesome. Incredible. Thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time to talk about your experiences into sport, talking about the Leafs and the way that the NHL is going to be set up for the playoffs. And it'll be definitely an interesting time to see if our hometown favorites get behind the wheel and really grind it into the Stanley Cup Finals. Fingers crossed, but we'll see how it goes.
I look forward to being there every step of the way. Go Leafs, go.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure. You bet.